So Rainbow Unicorn Land's First Minister appeared on Good Morning Britain this morning to participate in what was quite frankly a wasted time, all said and done. More importantly, a wasted opportunity, you could say, as Piers Morgan decided to dominate the interview with rather inept questioning, which consequently provided no favours to anybody, bar her, resulting in the proverbial takeaway from the SNP standpoint, one that has allowed her to come away smelling of roses, yet again. Anyway.
I oppose Brexit, I oppose it in principle, but there is absolutely nothing, or was nothing inevitable about the mess that Brexit became. That has been down...
Yet again. Another staunch Remainer using the shambolic situation Theresa May created in order to strengthen their case. The same case that they had long before Theresa May created the shambolic situation that they now use as a means of proving their points. You know, it makes you wonder what these people would be saying today if things had been different. Probably still using the bus argument, I would think. Either that or the people didn't know what they were voting for jargon. Who knows? One thing remains abundantly clear. Ever since Theresa May gifted them with the keys to this shit show, they haven't held back in exploiting it.
The real reason why Parliament has not agreed any deal for Brexit is that 3/4 of Parliament actually voted to remain. They don't want Brexit to happen. So when they bang on about democracy and prorogation and so on, the absolute truth of this is that Parliament, for 3 years, in my opinion, has systematically done everything in its power to prevent the will of the people and the way they voted in the majority in that referendum from happening. And I say that as someone who voted Remain and still would vote Remain again tomorrow. Well, you may laugh, but 17.4 million people, I believe...
I'm laughing because I can't get a word in edgeways.
They have every right to feel betrayed by Parliament.
You'll stop laughing about that soon.
Well, they have every right to feel betrayed by Parliament.
With the greatest of respect, Piers, and I hesitate to say this because I'm sure I'll pay a price for it, but I think you're wrong. And let me say that from somebody who also voted Remain in a country that heavily voted Remain. But if you're basing your decision on what it means for independence, let me be very, very clear. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe. The vote, I put forward to Theresa May at the time a compromise proposal. OK, let's have the UK leave the EU, but let's stay in the single market and the customs union. Nobody really contemplated...
Which is not leaving the European Union whatsoever. But why am I not surprised that this compromise gets a mention? This compromise that was rejected, which has been consistently brought up in the never-ending stream of anti-Brexit SNP articles throughout the months. This compromise which is multiplied in the process to give off this impression that multiple compromises were shot down in flames. Yet the argument is now pointless, as she's on record as saying not too long ago in fact, that any form of Brexit, no matter how soft, quote-unquote, would be damaging and catastrophic to Scotland. Therefore, that would include said compromise or compromises. So I don't really understand why you're still continuing to use these compromises as a point. Anyhow.
During that referendum, being dragged out of the single market and the customs union. So that was possible compromise grounds that Remainers and Leavers could have come together
Nicola
on.
Sturgeon.
And yet that was completely...
I'm not letting you get away with
nonsense?
that. It is complete nonsense. The Prime Minister of this country, the week before the referendum...
I put forward a compromise proposal.
David Cameron made it crystal clear as the Prime Minister, a week before the referendum, be under no illusion. He said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime vote, there won't be another one, and it will mean coming out of the single market. He couldn't have made it any clearer. Everybody knew when they voted that if you voted to leave, we were leaving. We weren't staying partly in, we were leaving. I knew that. I mean, why didn't you know that? How did you not know that?
Johnson.
Yeah, because Boris Johnson at one stage said that it was possible to stay in.
Boris Johnson, stay in the single market. But the point I'm making, you're saying that there are Remainers who were never reconciled to the vote. What I'm saying to you, and it's factually correct, is that people like me put forward potential compromise options and they were completely dismissed out of hand in favour of this hard-line interpretation of the Brexit.
This hard-line interpretation of the Brexit votes. Just fucking pull the other one, seriously. Within a matter of months after the referendum, the soft and hard Brexits became ingrained within a narrative, and 3 years on, those responsible for doing just that still refer to these concepts. Where exactly was Theresa May ever favouring a so-called hardline interpretation? You're just after referring to the shit show that she's created. You're constantly referring to people apparently feeling let down by Parliament that voted to leave. A mindset that wouldn't exist at all if there was a favouring of a so-called hardline interpretation. Hardline, of course, being Brexit, the Brexit that was voted for, not some makeshift so-called soft compromise.
Vote that Theresa May and others wanted to pursue. And, you know, that is the kind of implications, the hardline interpretation, the hard Brexit, now the possible no-deal Brexit, and the consequences of that, which are severe for people the length and breadth of the UK.
But the reason
I mean,
Boris
in Scotland,
Johnson...
and this is the case across the UK,
but the reason
we have an estimate that says our economy will tip into recession. Why should we accept that?
I don't interrupt you, but the reason that Boris Johnson is doing what he's doing, pressing the nuclear option, if you like, is because for 3 years, Parliament has done everything it can...
Can I just say, why are we still acting as if Boris Johnson is pulling a blinder to force through a no deal? It's pretty apparent, in my opinion anyway, that the outcome we're most likely to see will be a withdrawal agreement 2.0 with the backstop removed all of a sudden. However, as I've said before, if we had a pro Parliament in order to pursue no deal, the politicians, including Sturgeon, who've done nothing other than try to stop Brexit under the guise of blocking no deal, would be at fault for that. It was only the day before the hysteria began in regards to Boris Johnson, when all the head honchos of the Lefty Brigade were at some heavily publicised meeting discussing methods in order to block no deal Brexits and bring about an extension to then push for a second referendum of sorts. Instead of suggesting Boris Johnson is some fucking dictator, maybe some self-awareness wouldn't go amiss with people like this. Really.
Stop any kind of deal going through whatsoever. They rejected it time and again in massive numbers.
We're meant to live in a parliamentary
and the reason,
democracy.
again, I come back to you, how can it be democratic when the country is asked to vote in a referendum, they vote overwhelmingly, 17.4 million people, to leave the European Union. 3 years later, we still haven't because 600 and... How many MPs are there? 650? 650 MPs in this country have decided, because 3/4 of them voted to remain, that they're simply not going to pass any kind of deal which would make Brexit happen. That is the reality of where we are. So when people say Boris Johnson, is betraying democracy, I say, what about the parliamentarians who have steadfastly betrayed democracy now for 3 years?
Well, that's your interpretation of what happened. It's not my interpretation. I'm the First Minister of a country that voted overwhelmingly to remain. Notwithstanding that, I put forward a compromise proposal.
You've also been one of the most vocal advocates for a people's vote, and I didn't hear these compromises that you keep referring to be mentioned at your insufferable rallies throughout the years in regards to a people's vote, a second referendum. Don't sit here and act as if the only thing you have done throughout this whole process is try to ask for a compromise. You have been one of the poster girls for trying to stop this whole process.
The House of Commons hasn't voted yet to leave because no proposition has been put forward to leave that wouldn't do real and lasting and untold damage to the country.
That's not why nothing's gone through. The reason nothing's gone through is
that's your opinion.
No, my opinion is fact.
That's your opinion.
3/4. My opinion is fact.
No. Your opinion
is delusional, Piers Morgan.
This opinion is fact.
Can I finish one point, Piers?
Do you dispute,
Nicola? Can I finish
a
point?
Let me ask you one supplementary, then you can come back to your point. Do you dispute that 3/4 of Parliament voted Remain? You don't dispute that, right?
No, I don't. But your point. I voted Remain and desperately
and you don't want Brexit to happen, do you?
Desperately wanting to remain. Interesting to note that little quip there. It's that desperation, of course, that's fueling the independence talk. Just be sure to remember that. Making sure that if the UK does leave the EU, she can confidently rely on the stupid pricks who believe her bullshits about independence. Even the term independence. It's not independence, realistically. Swapping one union for another.
How can you square that?
Because you don't want Brexit to happen.
A compromise option.
Every part of your waking day is designed to stop Brexit happening and force through independence.
No. If she was successful in stopping Brexit, then she'd have no legal jurisdiction to call upon the mandate that they have currently. I really wish people would stop perpetuating this false description of the SNP, as they constantly have the media making out that their only focus is independence as their top priority, And above all else, that's the only thing that they care about. And then it gives these people an excuse to fucking lap it up. They get to avoid any potential tricky questions in regards to their contradictions because the media paints their picture for them.
This chaos, because what you really want is to get out of the UK.
Well, if that's the case, explain to me why is she trying to stop Brexit? It's a simple question with a very difficult answer. One that she gets to avoid because Piers Morgan, in this case, has painted the scene for her.
Know that? No, I would admire you more if you stared down the barrel of that camera and say, Piers, you're right. I hate Brexit. I don't want it to happen. Sod the voters and get us out of the UK. That is your position, right?
I'll look down the barrel of the camera and say two things. Firstly, you love the sound of your own voice, which is fair enough, absolutely.
Coming from you.
Entitled to do so.
We all love the sound of our own voices in
Exactly.
If we don't, why should anybody else?
It takes one to know one. But secondly, yes, I want Scottish independence, but I don't want to see the rest of the UK destroy itself in the process. Now, let me finish.
See how she very quickly added that in just at the end, before switching to another point. It's such a weak argument that they don't want to see the UK destroy itself, quote unquote, as if Scotland leaving the Union wouldn't damage the Union, or potentially destroy it in the long run. There's a real potent waft of horseshite coming from this line of argument. Stopping Brexit renders their mandate obsolete, showcasing a clear, gaping contradiction with their insufferable bullshit. One they are able to brush off with claiming that they are not going to see the UK destroy itself. If you want to run with the narrative that Scotland voted to remain, England and Wales, never. What about their voices? What about the million Scots who voted to leave the EU? Are they to be ignored? Are they to be thwarted? Cast aside, quote unquote? You really expect us to believe that the SNP are only contradicting their own policies and talking points because they're trying to ensure that the health of the UK remains intact after the fact. Instead of just coming out and admitting that if they are able to stop Brexit, if they are successful in stopping it, then they no longer have legal grounds to call upon their mandate for a second independence referendum.
Finish the point and make two quick observations. Firstly, I'm somebody who voted Remain and yet put forward a compromise option to leave the EU but stay in the single market and customs union that was rejected. So that negates the argument you are making. Secondly, we were told that Brexit was all about bringing back sovereignty to the parliamentary democracy that we are supposed to.
Oh, that's funny, her talking about democracy. Let's not forget this is the same woman that tried to use legal action to prevent triggering Article 50. She's also spearheaded campaign after campaign to have a people's vote. And the EU election pamphlet, courtesy of Helmet Head, made a promise of stopping Brexit. A bit more than just merely asking for a measly compromise, is it nuts?
Live in. And now we have a government that is prepared to shut down Parliament and ignore the law. Now, I simply say to anybody who's cheering Boris Johnson on in that to think how they would feel if a government that they didn't agree with was shutting down Parliament and ignoring the law in order to push through a policy that they didn't support.
I know, but Nicola Sturgeon...
Pushing through any fucking policies, though, that's the point. You are part of the problem, creating and adding to this sense of hysteria that's really uncalled for the most part.
Yes, I do have sympathy for that. They were let down by politicians like Boris Johnson, who were not honest with them about the complexities and the implications. And I go back to a point I made. I speak to people in Scotland, although we voted by majority to remain. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe. If you're basing your decision on what it means for independence, let me be very, very clear. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe.
This video's starting to get a bit too long. But I mean, seriously, how many more times is this helmet-headed wanker going to promptly remind us all that Scotland voted to remain, while subsequently leaving out how that majority came to be in the first place? A surge in support, record level of seats in the run-up to the referendum for the EU membership, courtesy of independent supporters. So what better way to ensure Remain is the majority in Scotland in the upcoming referendum, than to tell the surge in support that voting to leave the EU means the premise for independence will not arise. Wow. You know, Helmet Head is the reason that the majority voted to remain, not because the people share her EU obsession. I really wish somebody, just somebody, would call her out in it. But yet again, a missed opportunity.
Explain to me.
Well, of course, Piers, if we don't Brexit, then the result of the referendum in Scotland on Brexit will be honoured, not ignored, because,
well, I wouldn't know, would it? Because at the end of the day, the UK referendum had a result of majority to leave the UK. No, the EU, sorry. Therefore, that includes Scotland, meaning that if Brexit stopped, then the referendum result is not honoured in Scotland. It's not honoured at all.
I keep having to remind you, 62% of people in Scotland...
It doesn't matter. You were...
But if you're basing your decision on what it means for independence, let me be very, very clear. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe.
It doesn't matter. You keep saying something that's irrelevant.
It's not a particularly strong case. It's not a particularly strong case for staying in the Union to say the views of Scotland simply don't matter.
They do matter, but you lost.
And it's not a particularly strong case to leave the Union to fucking rejoin Europe.
With whatever is imposed upon us.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Imposed upon us? Are you being serious? And what about the people in Scotland that voted to leave? What about the people that didn't vote for the insufferable SNP party? What about the people that voted to leave the European Union, who have to suffer her shit on a daily basis and have to suffer the threat and the possibility of Brexit being stopped because Helmet Head and David fucking Lammy and Joe Swinson, etc. are unhappy about the concept?
You lost and you won't accept defeat.
We won.
You did lose, you fucking boot. Jesus Christ, man. This is what I'm talking about. You did lose. When people voted whether or not they wished to remain or leave in that referendum in 2016, it was not based on country-by-country basis. Fucking, why am I explaining this shit?
Your referendum in Scotland, we voted to remain.
Because you told them to, you fuck! Oh man, I'm done before I fucking flip. Peace.